People often confuse transcription, improvisation, interpretation, composition, because they seem so complementary, perhaps interchangeable. Of course, those who know that the composition is finished before you start playing it. And improvisation, it's like an allegory of life. It's open-ended when you start it. Might or not have a plan, let just your imagination guide you. But in any case, inevitably it ends, but there is no formal plan with a defined ending, which is the case of a composition, which by essence is thoughtfully organized, therefore written, rewritten, possibly shortened until you extract the essence of the thought instead of just spreading a very long logoria of notes. But it needs to also keep within its flow that spontaneous discourse that doesn't give the impression that you're reciting only notes, but that there is some kind of, if not logic, some kind of connection, attraction for the next note coming from the preceding, as if it's an evidence that displays itself in front of the audience in real time, which makes the audience members feel connected to you because they feel they're in a journey with you in your imagination, in your storytelling, and they feel like they are part of the storytelling path rather than just assisting to somebody reciting their lines. Then transcription is something where you transform a genre into another, not touching the style per se, hopefully, because you need to be there honest to the original score in the spirit of it. If it's for piano, for orchestra, for voice, for anything, and that you make it for something else, from or to piano, or from to and from the orchestra to the piano, from the piano to the orchestra, from the choral work to the piano, etc. Of course, you cannot put lyrics in a solo piano piece. If you transcribe, therefore play on the piano something that needs singers. You don't have a bow, so you cannot play a bowed instrument even if you play their part on the piano. Now the polyphony of the instrument, the two hands and the 88 keys, allow on the piano to play mostly non-piano repertoires. Not exactly rightfully so, but it gives a good illusion. That's when I think the good transcription ends up by being a piece on its own. Right. Not only the echo of the original one. And what is the purpose, would you say, of it? Well, it's bring to a recital program for pianists an orchestral piece. It used to be the vogue in the 19th century because, of course, there was less access to recorded music. With today's access, you would say the utility of a transcription seems unnecessary or exotic or eccentric, since you can go directly to retrieve the original form of the given genre and don't have to go through a narration from another instrument's point of view. But I still find that beyond the look-alikeness with the original, the transcription in the process brings a different dimension. For instance, the sound's length with the decay of the piano versus, let's say, the strings orchestra. It's almost as if you have a different season of representation of the same piece. Now, it's not necessary, but it's important to know that it's not an interpretation. It's basically playing the notes on another instrument. And if you have enough fingers and the pedal hopefully, well, even the middle pedal, helping you to multiply your hands as much as possible, you still don't have the room for everything. So you have to make choices. And so the interpretation is translation, is the transmission through your reading of a text which was left by the composer's intent through the filter of a notation, which is precise as it gets, leaves room for interpretation. So when you translate a text, you can choose this or that adjective among the synonyms, which you think matches closest to what the original language's choice of an adjective means. And it's possible that this tiny innuendo does not affect the overall understanding of the translation. After all, is the meaning that matters. But I find that an interpretation, therefore a translation, is textually right, correct, respectful of the details, the indications, the markings, the notes. So objectively, you should hear a greatest percentage of what everybody should be hearing when they read this music. And therefore, the difference between the interpretation of this or this pianist should be marginal. However, there is something between the notes. We call it rubato, for lack of better word, which means stolen. Time, space, freedom, call it anything you want, but a little bit room of wiggle, as if you have an imaginary analogy with a tree. If the wind blows on the branches and the, let's say, the leaves shiver, there is room for difference of amount of shivering. So it might be not a big deal, because it's not like you change the structure, the notes, the pitches, the rhythm, the pulse, but in the way you state the elements, you might take a little more time between the words, instead of taking a little more time between the words. And that is to do with how you as a performer have perceived, beyond the information of the pitches and the rhythms, you have perceived what it vehicles through what it's telling. And sometimes it's only what music itself is, not necessarily something that needs to be added on top of it. And sometimes it triggers the individual imagination of every listener, even sitting together in a hall or individually in a room, that whatever your performer's intent is, or your level of understanding of the innuendos of the text in terms of the intent of the composer, yes, you can convey it by voicing this, less voicing that, bringing a certain soundscape sculpture, choosing how to present the material, which skews the point of view of the listener, because they don't have the score or the liberty to say, I want to rather hear better the secondary voice if you bring it in the shadows, bringing in light the main melody, or vice versa. So then they follow your playing of the piece. If they know the piece, they can be critical. Like after you read a book and you see an adaptation on film, you say, "Oh, it doesn't correspond to what I imagined when I read it." Well, because a director's point of view is their own, and you go see their point of view of the book. But if you don't know the book or the screenplay before, you're less critical about it. You just receive the storytelling, and often the performer has to be convincing because of their own conviction, then you receive it as a self-evidence. And if you compare then this interpretation of the same piece by some other performer, you can start saying, yeah, but this tempo I prefer, but this rubato was too much, but this voicing was too confusing, or this articulation was not enough singing, and you start realizing that you acquire a taste for this interpretation. So you become an informed listener who then chooses the performer for a given style, genre's piece. Saying, oh, for Brahms I prefer this, for Chopin I prefer that, or for this sonata by this composer I prefer this performer. This concept of interpretation was less obvious until the 19th century included, because the composers were the performers. Therefore, there was no distance between the piece and the interpretation, since it was from the producer to the market. It's like a analogy with a farmer's market. The farmer grows the produce that you purchase in the market from the farmer. But when you have a salesman in between, that is the performer, the middle person between the piece, because most of the composers are gone, and the performer's audience, you have the performer who is the filter, who filters in turn the text to bring it back alive from the notation, regardless if it's how it was supposed to have been. Therefore, people disagree and agree to disagree, or disagree to disagree about interpretation very firmly. There is no... People become very picky when they're aware and informed. Though in the past, interpretation included improvisation, which meant changing the notes, the patterns rather, eventually the decoration or the ornamentations, not necessarily the structure. But who knows, perhaps also. And paraphrase meant restating it in your own words rather than reciting the words. And a transcription is changing the genre but keeping the words or the notes, therefore. And very often when you hear a performer perform, they usually play from memory, so you end up by believing, like an actor delivering their lines, that what they're saying is what they're saying, not what is written to be told. And if you don't believe in it, then you never connect to the storytelling. And so inevitably the performer becomes the vector of the piece in real time, in the present of now, regardless of how it used to be performed, or we assume it was, or we are informed it was, and how it is, and the instrument, and the acoustic, and the audience, and the expectation, and the competition, and the comparisons. And you end up by becoming so well informed that you're basically unhappy with everything. Unless you play it yourself, then you have to learn the technique, the reading knowledge, the performance practice, and then you play the way you like it. Ultimately, it's not about liking, it's also about believing that this is the right thing. There is a right and a wrong because there is a text. And in improvisation, there is no text, you make it up. In the transcription, there is a text, but you transform it. And in the music making, music inventing, music reinventing, there are several layers that people feel like you either take too much freedom or not enough freedom, because it's in the eye of the beholder. The respect for itself is a good discipline. The freeing from the obligation is that you learn the purpose of the obligation's absolutism. After all, if you learn the purpose of the discipline, you can take freedoms with it because you know why those discipline laws were there not to be trespassed. And if you do it with knowledge. I personally get very close to pieces of music which I studied with Mademoiselle Boulanger, who was a student of Fauré, and who taught me how Fauré liked his music be played. It doesn't mean it's the only way. It's just that I have a rare opportunity because of her longevity and her willingness and incredible generosity to translate to me, because it means to her to transmit the truth that she perceived from her master whom she admired, that his music shouldn't be heard performed in a different way than the way she thinks it corresponded to his musical world. But she was still open-minded about other options. It's just that in the case of Beethoven, she didn't know him, but Fauré she did. Debussy she met. Ravel she was co-student with in Fauré's class. So I had a sense of authenticity rather than only truth about how to read the in between the lines, innuendos of the score, beyond the obligational, strict need to respect it, while you take the freedom to leave it when you retell it. You don't change it, but by retelling it, you bring it alive your way, and you impose a certain portion, proportion, percentage of your own being, of your own psyche over the statement of the music itself. It's an involved interpretation rather than holding back and saying, I'll just as a craftsman let the music exist on its own and you receive it as you like. I think neither of the two should be completely the only way. I think there should be a middle ground between respect for the text and involvement in the text when retelling it. In this sense, interpretation becomes an honest and involved statement which is not yours unless you composed it, but then it becomes your conviction, therefore you're convincing. And beyond convincing, you're perhaps mesmerizing, inspirational. In other words, music is alive, not just a notation, which in fact is sort of a bottle in the ocean. And once you read it, you start understanding, misunderstanding, over-understanding, afraid to do wrong, or just allow yourself to be yourself in the piece, jubilantly respectful, emotionally involved, intellectually convinced, and always trying to do your best every time you restate it. Because what you love, you respect, what you are engaged in is your music making beyond all these differences between interpretation and other forms of translation that are transcription or improvisation. Thank you.